Once upon a time, in a faraway land called Japan, there lived a man named Yoshie Shiratori. It was the year 1936, and Yoshie Shiratori found himself in a terrible situation. He was put in prison for a crime he didn't commit. This was a dreadful place called Aomori Prison. In this prison, life was harsh. The prison guards were cruel, and every night, they beat and hurt Yoshie. Things got even worse when the prosecutors decided he should be put to death. Yoshie felt trapped, and he thought it was time to escape, even though escaping from Aomori Prison wasn't easy. One day, at 5:30 in the morning, Yoshie saw his chance. He had been watching the guards for months, learning their routines. He knew there would be a 15-minute gap when the guards wouldn't be around. So, he took a metal wire he had hidden and used it to unlock his cell door. It was tough because his hands were stiff from the cold, but he persevered, and the door opened. But he wasn't out of trouble yet. There were more locked doors ahead. Yoshie knew he had only a few minutes before the guards returned, so he didn't waste any time. He tried to pick the locks on the remaining security doors. Luckily, he succeeded and managed to get out of the prison. However, he was only halfway to freedom because he was still inside the search perimeter, which meant the alarm could go off at any moment. At 5:45 in the morning, the guards came back and peered into his cell. What they saw was Yoshie sound asleep in his futon bed. However, what they didn't realize was that they were looking at something else. Yoshie had cleverly placed a pile of loose floorboards under his duvet to trick them. It wasn't until the next morning that they discovered the truth, but by then, Yoshie had already escaped. But Yoshie's escape was just the beginning of his incredible journey. 3 days later, he was caught trying to steal supplies from a hospital. This time, they sent him back to prison, but instead of facing the death penalty, he was sentenced to life behind bars. He would never see his family again, his wife, and his daughter. All the months of planning had led to only 3 days of freedom, and now it seemed he'd be locked up for a very long time. Fast forward to the year 1942, in the midst of the Second World War. Yoshie found himself transferred to a place called Akita Prison in Akita City. The guards there treated him even worse than they did in Aomori. They had heard about Yoshie's previous escape and were determined to make an example out of him. They wanted to make sure he would never escape again. Yoshie's life in Akita Prison was a nightmare. He was beaten, made to do hard labor, and forced to sleep on a cold, concrete floor during the harsh winter. They even put him in solitary confinement in a specially made cell with smooth copper walls, high ceilings, and almost no sunlight. They also made sure to keep him handcuffed at all times. Despite the constant abuse, there was one guard, Kobayashi, who showed him some kindness. Kobayashi never hurt Yoshie and even checked on him from time to time, concerned for his well-being. This small act of compassion made life a bit more bearable for Yoshie and might have been what kept his spirit alive. One stormy night in June of 1942, while Yoshie was in solitary confinement, something incredible happened. Around midnight, a guard looked into his cell and couldn't believe his eyes. Yoshie had vanished into thin air. All that remained were his handcuffs. But how did he do it? Well, the guards had made a few assumptions about Yoshie that didn't apply to him. For one, they didn't think he could pick handcuff locks, but Yoshie was actually a master at it. He had several methods to choose from, and in this case, he used lock-picking skills he had acquired. He managed to free himself from the cuffs, and that was just the beginning. He placed his palms and soles of his feet on the smooth copper sheets of his cell and started climbing the unclimbable wall. Yoshie was an expert climber with an uncanny ability to scale walls like a lizard. Once he reached the skylight above, he noticed that the window was sealed, but the wooden framing around it was starting to rot. So, night after night, when the guards weren't looking, he climbed the copper walls and loosened the framing bit by bit. After a couple of months, the window finally came loose. Then came the tricky part. He had to choose the right day to escape. Yoshie waited for a stormy night so the guards wouldn't hear his footsteps on the roof. And that's when he made his move. He escaped from prison again, and this time, he wouldn't be caught, or at least, not in the way you'd expect. 3 months later, on September 18th, the head guard, Kobayashi, was at home when he heard a knock on the door. To his surprise, it was the fugitive Yoshie Shiratori, unkempt and disheveled, asking for a favor. A stunned Kobayashi took him in and listened to what he had to say. Yoshie explained that he didn't actually mind being in prison, and the only reason he escaped twice was due to the terrible treatment he received from the guards. Kobayashi, however, was the only one who treated him with respect, so he felt he owed it to him to let him in on his grand plan. Yoshie's plan was ambitious. He wanted to campaign for change and gain his legal freedom through a civil lawsuit, highlighting the corruption and brutality of the Japanese prison system. But as a fugitive on the run, he knew it wouldn't be easy. He needed Kobayashi, the well-respected head guard of Akita Prison, to vouch for him and strengthen his credibility. Minutes later, while Yoshie was in the toilet, Kobayashi made a fateful decision. Instead of helping Yoshie, he called the police. It was a heartbreaking betrayal, and Yoshie was back in prison, this time with a life sentence. He would never see his family again. 6 years passed, and it was now the year 1948. In the freezing cold of Hokkaido's Abashiri prison, Yoshie Shiratori's resolve remained unbroken. The guards were determined to make a cell that was escape-proof, and they succeeded. Yoshie was shackled with iron handcuffs and leg cuffs that couldn't be picked. Removing them required 2 specialists and a lengthy process. Even bathing was an ordeal. Weeks of being shackled with no movement left Yoshie with wounds infested with maggots. The temperature in the cells dropped below freezing, and meals often froze solid. Life in Abashiri prison was pure torment. But Yoshie was not one to give up easily. One day, in a fit of desperation, he tried to force his way past the guards, but they pushed him back and beat him down. An enraged Yoshie stood up and vowed that he would escape from Abashiri prison just as he had before. He even claimed that handcuffs were pointless on him because he could break free physically, showcasing his almost superhuman strength. The guards decided to build the ultimate escape-proof cell. They reinforced everything and made sure no openings were large enough for Yoshie to pass through. They even used special handcuffs and leg cuffs that weighed 20 kilograms each and had no keyhole. Only metalwork specialists could remove them, and they visited only once every few weeks. Yoshie seemed trapped for good, but he had one more ace up his sleeve. He could dislocate his joints at will. With this ability, he could slide through small openings like a caterpillar. The guards didn't account for this skill, thinking that if they made openings smaller than Yoshie's body, he couldn't escape. For months, Yoshie secretly worked on his escape plan. He saved bits of miso soup to rust the screws and bolts in his cell. Eventually, he managed to loosen the floorboards under his futon, creating a tunnel to freedom. As the seasons changed, Yoshie patiently continued his work. When the guards searched his room at night, they didn't suspect the hole hidden beneath his bedding. Finally, he was able to remove his handcuffs and leg cuffs, along with the steel frame of the inspection window. His opening was still small, but now he could slide through. One stormy night in August, while the guards were focused on other duties, Yoshie seized his chance. He slid through the small hole, climbed through a broken window in the roof, and disappeared into the wilderness. He had done the impossible once again, becoming the only man to escape from Abashiri prison. However, this time, Yoshie faced an even greater challenge: nature. He was in Hokkaido's cold, snowy mountains, and the only direction he could go was into the freezing wilderness. The guards believed that the harsh cold and mountain bears would be his end. But Yoshie was determined to prove them wrong. He survived by living off nuts, berries, wild rabbits, raccoons, and even learned to catch crabs by watching bears. Life was harsh, but Yoshie was resilient. A year passed, and in August 1945, Yoshie ventured down from the mountains and discovered a changed world. The streets were filled with signs in English, and posters and flags of war had vanished. Young Japanese girls were holding hands with American soldiers. Yoshie realized that Japan had surrendered the previous year, and the Americans had taken over the prison system. His wife had secretly hoped for this outcome, as it meant people might forget about Yoshie. But now that he knew Japan was under new management, he decided to rejoin society. However, his return was not without challenges. Yoshie was hungry and, in a moment of desperation, stole a tomato from a field. A farmer saw him and thought he was a local thief. A scuffle ensued, and the farmer died. Yoshie was arrested again, this time facing a murder charge. It didn't take long for the authorities to realize they had captured Yoshie Shiratori, the infamous escape artist. He was sentenced to death by the District Court of Sapporo and sent to Sapporo prison to await execution. This time, they took extreme measures to prevent his escape. Yoshie was placed under constant surveillance by 6 armed guards. His cell was fortified with reinforced doors, ceilings, bars, and windows. Every opening was made smaller than his head, making escape seemingly impossible. He was even handcuffed most of the time. But Yoshie hadn't given up. He had conditioned the guards to always look up and keep an eye on him, and they focused their attention on windows and skylights, neglecting the floor. It was their biggest mistake. Yoshie used every bit of his determination and skills to remove the bolted floorboards beneath his bed. He dug through the floor over a month, hiding his activities by placing the floorboards back in place each night. Finally, he managed to create an escape route. One morning, when the guards ordered him to wake up, Yoshie refused. This went on for days until they couldn't take it anymore. They entered his cell forcefully, only to find Yoshie sprawled on the floor, seemingly lifeless. Panic surged through the prison. Unbeknownst to the guards, Yoshie had been faking unconsciousness, waiting for this moment. With a burst of energy, he leapt up and dashed through the hole in the floorboards, escaping the cell before they could react. The guards were dumbfounded. Yoshie's incredible escape didn't stop there. He had calculated his route, knowing exactly where to go and how to avoid guards. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, and Yoshie was the mouse that always eluded the cat. He managed to make his way out of the prison, but he wasn't free just yet. He had to disappear completely. Using his survival skills, he made his way to a remote island, surviving on whatever he could find. He knew that as long as he was in Japan, he would always be hunted. Time passed, and Yoshie's story became a legend. He was like a phantom, occasionally spotted but always vanishing into the wilderness before anyone could catch him. The authorities never gave up their pursuit, but Yoshie's skills in evading capture were unmatched. For over a decade, Yoshie roamed the wild, surviving through sheer determination and cunning. He managed to make contact with his family secretly, but he couldn't stay with them for long. The authorities were always close behind. In the year 1960, at the age of 63, Yoshie Shiratori's incredible run came to an end. He was finally captured by the police while attempting to steal food from a farmer's shed. The years of living on the run had taken a toll on him, and he was no longer the agile escape artist he once was. Yoshie was sent back to prison, this time to Fuchu Prison in Tokyo. He was no longer the young man who had escaped from Aomori, Akita, and Abashiri prisons. He was now an old man, but his spirit remained unbroken. Inside the prison, Yoshie became a model prisoner. He helped other inmates learn new skills and worked hard to atone for his past crimes. He even met with the families of some of his victims and apologized for the pain he had caused. As the years went by, Yoshie's remarkable story of escape and survival became a source of inspiration for many. He showed that even in the darkest of circumstances, one could find the strength to persevere. In the year 2000, at the age of 93, Yoshie Shiratori was released from prison. He had spent a total of 45 years behind bars, but he had also spent those years transforming himself into a better person. He became an advocate for prison reform, using his own experiences to shed light on the harsh conditions within Japan's prisons. Yoshie passed away peacefully in the year 2006, leaving behind a legacy of resilience and a story that would be told for generations to come. His name would forever be associated with the indomitable human spirit and the unyielding pursuit of freedom. And so, the story of Yoshie Shiratori, the legendary escape artist, comes to an end. It is a story of hardship, determination, and the enduring power of the human spirit, reminding us all that, no matter the odds, one can find a way to break free from the darkest of prisons.